Let us pray. Open our eyes to see, open our ears to hear, open our hearts to love. Amen. On any given Sunday morning, we can feel connected to other Christian congregations in Sydney, across Australia and around the world. For churches that follow the cycle of lectionary readings, at least the Gospel reading is likely to be heard in common. This morning, though, I feel less enthusiastic about this commonality. My heart sinks when I think about what the Sydney Anglicans will be making of the correlation of the story of God's creation of humanity, which they won't be hearing in an inclusive version, with the emphasis on male and female, read alongside Jesus' teaching about divorce and remarriage. I know that much will be made of the so-called complementarity of male and female, and the verses in Mark that say that from the beginning of creation, God created them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. In some churches this morning, these verses will be used to condemn people who have remarried after divorce, and to condemn the movement for marriage equality for LGBTI people. And there will be people in Sydney and across Australia and around the world who will be spiritually injured by what they hear this morning. And there will be some more liberal clergy who will decide it's a bit too difficult and skip the divorce section and go on to preach about Jesus' encouraging words about including children and becoming like a child in order to participate in the reign of God. But I do believe that when we read biblical words that the church has used to condemn and exclude people, we cannot let them go without interpretation. I remember when I was a parish minister in Christchurch in New Zealand, I took a wedding service for a couple who were not members of the congregation, who wanted the Ephesians reading that includes the instruction, "Wives, be obedient to your husbands." I didn't think that that was an appropriate understanding for marriage in the 20th century, as it was then, and they insisted in saying to me, "You're a minister, it's in the Bible." So I relented and said they could have it read, but if they did, then there would also need to be a sermon, and that it might take me some time to explore the full context and meaning of the text, probably about 20 minutes. At that point, they did change their minds. It seems to me that in these readings, biblical verses that describe something have been misinterpreted to require something else. The writers of Genesis and Jesus who quoted them were describing what happened when people married, not for everyone, because marriage has never been compulsory for Jews or Christians. I still find some value in the Genesis text because in it I see people struggling to give meaning to their experience of human intimacy and relation. But it's a mythological story. Adam, the gender-neutral earth creature, is not a historical being, and neither are the man and the woman who emerge from Adam. In the Genesis text, I see an affirmation of the diversity of creation, but also the limitations of a pre-scientific worldview that knew nothing of the distinction between biological sex on the one hand and social gender on the other, or indeed of the prevalence of human children who are born intersex. And it says nothing about people who are sexually attracted to a person of the same sex who wish to live in a loving, committed relationship with that person. That simply wasn't the question that was being addressed. The other problem is context. In a question to Jesus about divorce, it is clear that Anglicans and Protestants cheerfully ignore the unequivocal statement of Jesus about remarriage after divorce, and extrapolate from that a timeless teaching about marriage, which was not what he was talking about. So let us face these texts that have the power to terrorise. Today's gospel story has words that are hard to hear as good news. To talk about divorce can open for many people a whole range of wounds and experiences: shock, hurt, confusion and anger. But for others, divorce can mean relief, safety, a return to self, wholeness. I share, for those of you who don't know, that I was divorced in 1996 after a 16-year marriage. So I offer this reflection with gentleness and care, knowing that divorce has touched many of us, directly or indirectly. Jesus is caught up in this text in a religious conflict about sexuality with some people who quote the Bible back at him. Clearly, people in the first century were already fighting about the meaning of the Hebrew Bible. Even then, interpretation was complex. On the matter of divorce, the Torah, the law, actually had very little to say. It mentions it only once in passing in Deuteronomy chapter 24. We know from other sources that first century Jewish experts disagreed about the grounds of divorce. Could a husband divorce his wife just because he felt like it, or only if she had committed some serious fault? Jesus was being asked to take sides in that argument. That way one side or the other or both could find fault with his answer. But instead of wading into the middle of that argument as they expected, Jesus does something shocking. He says, Moses only allowed divorce in the first place because of your hardness of heart. Significantly for us, he is saying, you can't assume that just because it's in the Bible, it's the will of God. Some Bible verses express nothing more than the stupidity, the bigotry, the hardness of heart of the people who received them in the first place, and maybe of people who hear and read them now. Jesus talks to his hearers about your hardness of heart. He's not talking to the marginalised. He's talking to the observant people. They pay close attention to religion. They fulfil its demands and rules. They're respectable pillars of their communities. And they are all male. I suspect that's the particular issue in this case. They're all male. The Torah is addressed to males. In that world, males were public citizens. Women were private persons who did not belong in the public realm. And it was males who made decisions about marriage. Marriage wasn't the kind of arrangement that we know today where young people fall in love and decide to create a new family together. Marriage was a contract between the parents' families. The woman's family gave her away for the payment of a dowry, to bear a new generation of children for the husband's family. She did not even become a member of her husband's family. If she bore a male heir, and if she and the boy both lived long enough, she would finally have a secure place in it when it became her son's family. But if she was divorced and sent away, the son remained with his father, and she just had to hope that her birth family could and would take her back. This situation may be hard for us to contemplate, but it was the norm at the time. Marriage was something that men did to women, and so was divorce. And divorce was usually a disaster for women, socially and economically. Basically, divorce was for men. So Jesus takes this accepted cultural practice and the biblical passage found in Deuteronomy 24 that was seen as backing it up, and he says, that's not what God meant at all. That just reflects the mean-spiritedness, the hardness of heart, which is regarded as normal in our society. But Jesus isn't discarding the Bible, even though he is rejecting one particular text. Sometimes when we're looking for an easy way to understand these arguments, we distinguish between religious conservatives who take the Bible really, really seriously and religious liberals who don't take it seriously at all. Is Jesus being a conservative or a liberal? Neither, I think. Yes, he's tossing one text out, but he's also drawing on another one, making quite a big deal of it, interpreting it in a way that nobody had ever understood it before. The text he introduces is also from the Torah, from the law, from Genesis, when he says that a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. And then he adds his own commentary. Therefore, what God has joined, let no one separate. God, he says, has created something good here. Men just can't use it for their convenience and then discard it when a more attractive woman or a better family alliance comes along. The Torah preserved the power that men had in a patriarchal society to abuse women. Jesus challenged divorce in this context in order to protect women. And Jesus grounds his changing of the Bible in the Bible itself. God didn't intend to authorize hardness of heart. God intended to teach us how to love one another and to do one another good. Sadly, later Christians have turned Jesus' own statement into yet another license for hardness of heart. In Eastern Christianity, it's been held that Jesus was establishing an ideal of lifelong marriage, a goal. But Western Christians, on the other hand, held that Jesus was establishing a rigid new law. No one can be divorced, and if they are, they certainly cannot remarry. Hardness of heart was back with a vengeance. What Jesus was doing in this story was turning the whole way we interpret the Bible around. The Bible, he says, is not a book of statute law to protect the powerful. It is a book of astonishing insights into the extraordinary generosity of sacred power. The impulse of God all through the Bible is the well-being of God's beloved creatures. If you find things in the Bible that seem to speak otherwise, consider who benefits from that. Whose hardness of heart caused that failure in the sacred text? Whose hardness of heart is maintaining that interpretation even now? For me, this is key to understanding marriage from a biblical perspective in the 21st century, and it is why we must not give up on the struggle for marriage equality for LGBTI people. Just as Christians before us have opposed slavery, though it could be argued from the Bible, and the same of the subjugation of women, bans on interracial marriage, apartheid, and many other human evils. When the Bible seems to confirm your own hardness of heart, reject it the way Jesus did. And when the Bible breaks open your world and makes it bigger and more loving, it's achieving its true goal. So what is there in here, in this text, for us and for our relationships? How do we understand the divorces that we have known or experienced? And how do we understand the commitments we make in relationships? And what should we make of the long, hard road to marriage equality for LGBTI people in Australia? What is the connection between our personal commitments to those we love and the broader social fabric? The Church has long had a marriage ethic which has judged that lifelong marriage is the only good intimate relationship. I believe that this is a barren and unhelpful way of assessing relationship. Lifelong marriages have the potential to be life-giving and sustaining of the well-being of humans, but they also have the potential to undermine well-being. What we need is an ethic of intimate relationships that stresses the quality rather than the form of relationship. And I believe that love, equality, mutuality, and justice are what makes a relationship good. And relationships that lack these are not life-giving. But the truth is that even when these things are present, there are relationships from which we need to be set free. For our partners and ourselves. Relationships which do need to come to an end. Commitments that need to be revisited and changed. For a start, we live a lot longer than people did in biblical times. Our lifetime is a much longer lifetime than our ancestors in faith. It seems to me that ending a marriage can be an act of faithfulness to our partner and to ourselves. That divorce can be life-giving. That's how I've experienced it. Now I like, even love, my former husband as a friend, in a way that I could not for most of our marriage, because we were expecting things of each other we could not give, and eventually we hurt and betrayed one another. Divorce gave us both the opportunity to find partners whom we truly love, who truly love us, and it gave our son 4 parents who now love him unconditionally. The act of breaking or changing commitments can be judged ethically. How we handle the end of a relationship makes an enormous difference to the marriage partners and to others in their family, especially children, but also to wider family and friends. Where there is hurt and even hatred, this can be enormously difficult. But in situations where the separation is mutual, even when there has been hurt or betrayal, we can make decisions to act in ways which restore the web of relationship, which enable us to grow and learn, to become more human. This is much more difficult when there has been violence or injury or abuse of trust. In these situations, we may have to work out how to make the situation life-giving on our own, rather than to renegotiate with our former partner. Whatever the situation, when a marriage ends, people need help and support to leave the relationship without rancour, bitterness, hostility, or fear. And it takes the support of family and friends and community for this to happen, for the end of a relationship to have the qualities of mutuality and respect. Much of Jesus' energy in this controversy was spent showing how that we can interpret Scripture in a new way, which sees it as a priority for human well-being, for love rather than for legalism. As we seek to struggle for marriage equality, as we seek to care for one another in our relationships, which are never just private relationships, but always connected to others, may we seek for love and not for legalism. Whoever we are, whatever our circumstances, we can choose to love.